This is World's Creepiest Mysteries. Level 1, Mysterious but Easily Explainable. This level is for puzzling cases where a normal explanation still fits most of the facts. So the case is unsettling, but it still behaves like a disappearance that could be explained through ordinary causes like foul play, a voluntary departure, or chance encounter gone wrong. So one case that should fit this criteria is the disappearance of April Wiss in January of the year 2000. April was born on September 1st, 1983 in Wichita, Kansas, and over the years she grew into a somewhat rebellious teen. She stayed out all night, got a bunch of piercings and tattoos, and didn't always listen to her mother. And because her and her mother got into a bunch of arguments, April eventually decided that she really just wanted to move out and go live on her own. Now, April's mom was a woman named Gloria, aka Dee Clayson, and while Dee loved her daughter dearly, in her eyes, April was going down a bit of a dark path. So Dee figured that in order to fix this, she had to do something, and before long, she considered that, well, maybe acquiescing towards her daughter's desire for independence wouldn't be that bad of an idea. In fact, it could even be something that would teach her a lot about the challenges of living on your own. So within time, Dee made an arrangement that allowed for her daughter to go and live in an apartment with a friend of hers. And by friend of hers, I mean friend of Dee's, not April's friend. But the apartment was in a little complex known as Riverwalk Apartments on Marion Road, and by all appearances, it was a nice little setup. April wasn't going to be entirely alone because of her new roommate, but she would at least have a considerable degree of freedom. And for the first 3 months, everything went over quite well, and April, who had previously dropped out of school, even enrolled in a GED program in order to finish getting an education. But then suddenly, something happened that no one ever could have expected. Late at night on January 11, 2000, April left her apartment and began walking towards the intersection of Pawnee and Broadway, which is a pretty normal, busy-ish area in South Wichita. And at the time, she was wearing blue jeans, a white t-shirt, and a navy blue nylon jacket, and she brought with her her apartment key, her wallet, and a pager. And it pretty much seemed like she planned to be right back, considering the fact that she left behind $150, all of her belongings, and even a freshly baked cake. And she also kept all the lights on in the apartment. But despite all these factors just mentioned, April never came back home, and to this day has yet to be found. Originally, the police figured that perhaps she was just a runaway, considering her rebellious nature and some previous comments she had made to her mother about moving to California. But as time passed, this idea grew to be less and less likely, and investigators moved on to other theories. One theory mother thinks is quite possible is that she was abducted by human traffickers. The reason being that most medium to large-sized cities are unfortunately the site of human trafficking networks. But there's another theory that also appears to be possible in this case, and it involves the simple fact that only a month after her disappearance, April was set to testify in a trial involving a man accused of horrific crimes involving minors. So there's, of course, the possibility that because she was going to testify, April may have disappeared for that very reason, whether it be that she vanished voluntarily or that she was murdered. But for the time being, we simply don't know. Now, at the very least, I can reveal to you that the man accused of such terrible activity was convicted on 7 out of 8 charges. Of course, the one charge he wasn't convicted of involved the victim who April was going to testify on behalf of. Here's why this case is level 1. This case fits level 1 because the core outline is understandable. We know where April was last seen, and ordinary explanations still fit most of the known facts. The unanswered parts are serious, but they don't break the basic logic of what could have happened. Level 2, messy but explainable. Now, this level is where the trail gets shakier and several details don't line up cleanly, but the case is still within the realm of ordinary explanations. So unlike level 1, the issue here isn't just that we're missing answers, it's that the available clues feel incomplete, making every theory feel partial. Okay, for messy but explainable, one case that should fit this criteria is the case of Sharon Anderson, also from the year 2000. Sharon Christine Anderson from Stanwood, Washington, was a 50-year-old caseworker for the Department of Social and Health Services, and her job was primarily focused on helping welfare recipients become independent, and well, she was good at what she did, and a very dependable, responsible person. Together, she lived with her husband in a house in Stanwood, and from what people who knew her say, well, she was pretty happily married, and she had children and grandchildren that she loved dearly. But unfortunately, something would happen to her only a few weeks before Christmas of the year 2000, something that investigators have yet to explain. So at 9 a.m. on December 2nd of that year, Sharon left her home, informing her husband John that she planned to go out and run some errands and do some Christmas shopping at the mall in Everett, Washington. And this sequence of errands and shopping was actually quite specific. She would first go to McDonald's for breakfast, then stop at Fred Meyer in Marysville to check on some film she'd left to be developed, and then Walmart, and lastly head to a place in the Everett Mall known as Mervyn's. And additionally, she was planning to return home by 4:30 p.m. simply because she and John intended to go out to dinner before then attending a motorcycle show in Seattle, where they would probably see some cool custom bikes and vintage racers. And overall, it should have been about a 30-minute drive from Stanwood to Everett. But meanwhile, as Sharon drove to her destination in her silver Toyota 4Runner, her husband John took a nap at home and ultimately woke up around 5:30 p.m. Now, by the time John woke up, his wife definitely should have been home. So after a while, he became worried and tried calling her over her phone, but no matter how many times he called, she wouldn't pick up. So after failing to reach her, he decided to contact his wife's friend Mary in order to ask her if she had heard from Sharon or spoken with her that day. But as they got to talking, Mary denied having seen nor spoken with Sharon, so she decided to drive up to the mall to go look for a friend. And ultimately, after searching in and around the mall for a good period of time, she failed to locate her. However, Mary was able to find Sharon's SUV, which was evidently still in the parking lot of Mervyn's department store right outside the mall. As for the state of the SUV, well, it was still locked and appeared to be in good condition, but one thing that Mary could see by looking through the windows of the vehicle was that there were no Christmas gifts inside of it. So based on that, she speculated that Sharon may never have even entered the mall at all. Another key fact that was later learned regarding the SUV was that Sharon's cell phone and the gun she kept for protection were both still inside the vehicle. And according to those who saw the vehicle right after it was found, it even appeared to be freshly detailed. So this was all quite odd, but before long, the police were called and thus began the start of an official missing persons investigation. And over the next few weeks, several official searches were done in and around the area, but they pretty much resulted in nothing. And before long, Sharon's family and friends just began conducting these sort of large-scale searches of their own. And this group of people, which ranged from groups of 10 to sometimes 80 in total, they would meet every day at 9 a.m. and they would comb through the area around the mall, knock on doors, and conduct interviews with as many people as they could. This included local residents, business owners, random bystanders, you name it. But despite their painstaking efforts over the course of many months, the group failed to come up with any tangible evidence. And while the local sheriff commended them on their efforts, because the efforts did ultimately result in a bunch of tips, these leads really didn't go anywhere. And even the internal police investigation sort of went nowhere as well. One thing the authorities did find odd was the fact that following Sharon's disappearance, neither her credit card, the money in her bank accounts, nor her social security number were ever used again, not even on the day that she disappeared. So that probably wouldn't bode well for any potential theory about her disappearing on purpose. And additionally, according to her friends, well, she was not the type to just, up and run away. So overall, investigators found her case to be suspicious, but given how little evidence there was generally, they couldn't necessarily argue that foul play was involved, nor could they generate any quality theory. And to this day, nobody has any idea what happened. One of the few theories suggested that could have some value, in my opinion, actually relates to the fact that shortly before she vanished, she was reportedly threatened by one of her clients. Remember, she worked as a caseworker for the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services, and so she had clients. And one particular client was not so happy with her. And I couldn't find much of the specific details regarding this, but it appears that, according to her family, this person made some sort of threat. So, could this person have followed through with her threat? Who knows? Regardless, it's now been almost 3 decades, and unfortunately, Sharon Anderson has since been declared legally dead. Her family believes that whatever happened to her happened before her vehicle arrived in the parking lot of Mervyn's. Sharon was a member of the Cherokee tribe and a Harley Davidson enthusiast. Here's why this case is level 2. This lands in level 2 because we have a defined errand route and a clear endpoint, the SUV, but the evidence stops too soon. Multiple theories are possible, and yet none fully ties together every odd detail, so the case stays messy while still potentially explainable. Level 3, hard to explain. Now this is where things start to get really strange. At level 3, the mystery isn't just that someone vanished, it's that the evidence itself refuses to form one coherent story. Timeline has major holes, key clues point in different directions, and important investigative opportunities are lost. So unlike level 2, where the case is messy but mostly linear, level 3 feels fractured. Each theory explains part of it, but none explains all of it. Our candidate for this level is the case of 47-year-old James, aka Jamie Valdez, in 2021. And to give a little background about Jamie, well, he was a family-oriented, happy-go-lucky type who lived in Boonville, Arkansas. At the time of his disappearance in June of 2021, he had just recently gotten married to his wife Anna Valdez only a month prior. By this point, the couple were staying at Anna's mother's house, with the reason being that her mother had injured her back from a fall and she needed to be looked after. And overall, the household had a few people living under the same roof other than Jamie, his wife Anna, and her mother. And this included Anna's brother and his 2 daughters. And it's documented that during this period, the brother was actually facing charges for kidnapping. Now, there's never been any public indication or allegation that these charges were connected in any way to Jamie's disappearance, but the details sometimes mentioned in reporting. As for Jamie Valdez himself, well, he was apparently a nice enough man, but he was a recovering addict who was thought to be 1 year sober at the time of his disappearance. He had gone through a rehab treatment program, cleaned himself up, and really just made steps to turn his life around. Outside of these facts, Jamie also had a chronic medical issue in that he was a diabetic and was therefore required to take medication to fix his insulin levels. And according to Anna, whenever her husband's sugar levels were high, he began acting really cranky and irritated. And around 2018, 3 years before his vanishing, he actually experienced a medical episode while driving in which his vision went completely black. And then once an ambulance was called, the emergency medical personnel learned that his sugar was so high that he was on the verge of slipping into a diabetic coma. This incident later resulted in Jamie making some efforts to lose weight to ostensibly help control his diabetes, and he had successfully done so by the time this case reached its mysterious climax. He had lost several pounds. But in the days before his disappearance, Jamie's sugar levels had apparently been pretty high. While Anna kept insisting that he see a doctor about it, he did not do so. So now let's get into exactly what happened right before, during, and after he went missing. So first of all, according to his family, he was sometimes known to leave for a few days at a time, but during these trips, he would always remain in contact with his family, and he would always return. But then he wound up taking a trip that he didn't return from. And this trip took place after an argument he had had with his wife Anna on June 9, 2021. So evidently this argument was over the fact that the pair had agreed to spend the day together, but when Anna was then called into work by her boss, she informed Jamie that she was no longer going to spend the day with him, and that she would instead just go into work. So she did, in Jamie's pickup truck, and Jamie ended up following her to work in a 2010 blue Chevy Equinox that was technically in Anna's name. And so once again, to be clear, Anna took her husband's truck to work, and he later followed her in her Chevy Equinox. This information will be important later. But anyway, after meeting her at her place of work, Jamie pretty much continued the argument with her at her place of work. And before long, he just asked his wife if he could go back home. He was tired of arguing by then. He really just wanted to be done with it. So Anna agreed and just told him, okay, do whatever you want. And he hopped back into the blue Chevy, drove back to the house, took $600 from Anna's mother, and grabbed a bunch of clothes and threw them in the back of the Chevy. And by the way, it's unclear whether the $600 was taken with permission or as a loan. Regardless, after throwing the clothes in the back of the vehicle, Jamie then got back into the SUV and began driving out to Ozark, which is approximately 30 minutes away. And the reason why he was going there is because that's where his daughter from a previous relationship lived, along with other members of his family and his friend group. And he was very familiar with that area. According to a friend who apparently last saw him on June 12th, he reportedly had dinner with a few friends in Ozark that evening. And during the course of the dinner, he told the friends that he was going back to Boonville soon in order to patch things up with his wife. So once again, that appears to be the last time anyone saw him in person, at least from what's been reported. But 5 days after this, on the 17th, a group of 4 young men came across an abandoned SUV on a road known as Dry Creek Road. This road is in the Sugar Grove area, which is a little community that's located about 10 to 12 miles southeast of Boonville. And pretty close to this spot is a little body of water that's used as a swimming hole. So that's what this particular location is best known for. But after the 4 young men see the SUV, they observe 2 things at first. 1, it's abandoned, and 2, it's currently running. And after a while, they leave and go somewhere else. And when they come back, they see that the SUV is no longer running. But because they're a bunch of hooligans and the site is somewhat spooky, one of them writes on the back of the dusty, dirty window using their finger the words, "Help me, he is near." So this was obviously a prank. But 2 days after this, the vehicle was again discovered by someone else. This time it was the husband of Anna's boss, who also happened to be friends with Jamie. He had previously informed Anna he would keep a lookout for the vehicle. And when he found it and saw the words written on the back window and saw the condition of it, well, he was startled to say the least. So right away, he contacted Anna first. And then when she drove up to the scene and saw the SUV, she took a bunch of pictures of it and sent those pictures to Jamie's sister, asking her if she should contact the authorities. Meanwhile, Jamie's sister is like, well, yes, of course you should contact them. Even from the pictures, you could see that something wasn't right about the vehicle. And so right away, Anna filed a missing persons report. And once an investigation began, it was determined that 1, the doors were all completely locked on either side. 2, the keys were missing. 3, the front seat was pulled forward and the seam on it was ripped. 4, the back seat was laid all the way down. 5, the engine was damaged and various parts of it were disconnected. And 6, the computer parts and battery were disconnected as well. So overall, the SUV was in a very chaotic state. Before long, a series of searches were organized by the local authorities using tracking dogs and search teams, and they scoured through the area surrounding the truck. And, well, they found a series of items, including Jamie's insurance card, a receipt that may have come from his wallet, and some change. Outside of this stuff, there was no sign of him whatsoever. Additionally, there were some important objects missing. One very important object that was missing was a 40mm Glock handgun that Anna had purchased for him at some point, which was thought to have been kept in the vehicle in the glove compartment. But on top of this, his keys were missing, as we already mentioned, and so was his cell phone. Now let's talk about the SUV a bit more. For starters, the area it was found in was actually right across the street from a home that Jamie's mother used to live in. Additionally, because the vehicle was technically in Anna's name and she could no longer afford the payments for it, it was actually repossessed shortly after it was found. And for whatever reason, the authorities didn't take any fingerprints in it or do any forensic investigation, meaning that we've completely lost the opportunity to gain any more information from the vehicle, despite how suspicious the state of it was. And so that turned out to be a very frustrating missing piece of the puzzle. And overall, as the police investigation continued, the authorities had extreme trouble figuring out what the heck happened here. And one thing that's worth mentioning about the police investigation generally is that they noted Anna had entered a new relationship within weeks of Jamie's disappearance. But it's important to stress that, on its own, this is not evidence of wrongdoing and doesn't suggest involvement in his disappearance. Nevertheless, it's a fact worth mentioning. Now, a year after Jamie disappeared, there was a significant clue that came from a cell phone that many believe was actually overlooked in this case. So apparently, in late January of 2022, one of his family members tried to ping the last address of his phone using Find My iPhone. And when they did this, the result came up showing that the phone was last in an underwater area about 3 miles from where his vehicle was abandoned. So shortly after this fact was learned, the information was provided to the police, and they went and checked the area. But frustratingly, they didn't find anything. So, where does the case stand now? Well, to this day, there have been no new groundbreaking revelations outside of hearsay and rumors, and the police investigation hit a series of dead ends pretty quickly. This fits level 3 because the timeline has major holes, the physical evidence points in conflicting directions, and no single working theory explains the full picture. There's too many details that feel disconnected, almost like parts of different stories were stitched together, which is exactly what makes this one hard to explain, but maybe not impossible. Level 4, harder to explain. Now, this is a level where we still have a real verifiable final stretch of movement, but after that, the trail breaks in places where it shouldn't. The evidence doesn't just go missing, it starts looking disrupted, possibly staged, or internally inconsistent. So, unlike level 3, where the story is fractured, level 4 is where the fragments begin to imply deliberate interference. One candidate for our level 4 criteria is the strange disappearance of Leah Roberts, yet another case from the year 2000. Leah was born on July 23, 1976, in Durham, North Carolina. She and her family grew up in the suburbs, and she had one sister by the name of Kara and a brother named Heath. Personality wise, Leah was known for being the type of person who everybody liked pretty much as soon as they met her. She was outgoing, kind, and funny, and she was very smart too. In the mid 1990s, she began attending North Carolina State University. It was during these next few years, while she was attending college, as she really began to find herself and kind of gain a better understanding of her own identity. At the same time she was getting an education and learning who she was, however, Leah was going through what must have felt like a never ending series of personal trials and tribulations. During her sophomore year of college in 1997, her mother suddenly passed away as a result of heart disease. And then a year after that, Leah herself got into a really bad car accident that resulted in a punctured lung and a broken femur. And she ended up having to get a metal rod surgically implanted in her leg. Then in 1999, only a year after that, her father passed away only 3 weeks before she was set to take a trip to Costa Rica to take part in a field program. He had evidently suffered from a chronic lung condition. So within a 3-year time span, both her parents had died, and she herself had been the victim of a terrible accident. But despite all this, and despite being devastated immediately after her father's death, she still managed to push through, and she even decided to go through with the Costa Rican field program. Meanwhile, however, because she was set to travel to a foreign country and both her parents were now deceased, she granted her sister Kara power of attorney over her bank accounts. And then she went to Costa Rica and she had a life changing experience in which emboldened her desire to travel even more. Now, I've actually been there myself, and I can attest to the fact that it's a beautiful country filled with a lot of nice people. But once Leah returned, she started hanging out in coffee shops, reading Jack Kerouac, filling journals full of beautiful lines of poetry, learning guitar, and making a bunch of new friends. And she even adopted a pet kitten. And by early 2000, against the wishes of her older siblings, she soon decided that she was going to drop out of college only a few months before graduating. And in speaking with one friend and roommate by the name of Nicole, she declared to Nicole that she wanted to take a Jack Kerouac style road trip across the country. And well, that appears to be exactly what Leah did. But somewhere along the way, something went terribly wrong. On March 9th of 2000, Leah had a conversation over the phone with Kara, and together the two of them discussed Leah's future plans. And now, according to Kara, her sister did not sound to her like someone with a very concrete set of plans. In fact, she sounded like she was sort of lost and directionless. But before the two each hung up, they agreed to meet in person sometime soon. And later that same day, Leah and her roommate Nicole each agreed to babysit kids together the following day. And after they spoke about this, Nicole left their shared apartment and she went off to work. However, once Nicole returned from work, Leah was no longer home, and nor was her white 1993 Jeep Grand Cherokee. And despite her not being home, Nicole really didn't think much of it at first, considering the fact that her friend, since dropping out of college, had ceased to maintain any sort of consistent routine. So for Leah to randomly be out somewhere was pretty much to be expected. But the following day, when she still had not returned home, and yet was supposed to help babysit, Nicole started to become a bit curious. And then a day after that, her curiosity evolved into concern. And so soon, she repeatedly tried calling her and getting in touch with her, but she failed to get in contact. then finally, on March 13th, Leah's sister Kara officially reported her missing to the local authorities in Durham. And on the 14th, Kara and Nicole initiated a thorough search through Leah's bedroom. And among their findings were a bundle of cash equivalent to a month's worth of rent and expenses, and a note alongside the bundle that read in part, "I'm not idle, I'm the opposite." The note also mentioned Jack Kerouac and had a drawing of a Cheshire cat. One thing, or should I say furry creature, that was notably absent from the findings, however, was Leah's cat. This cat that she had gotten only a few months previously, well, she adored it and appeared to have brought it with her wherever she went. But additionally, a bunch of her clothes were gone, so it's clear that considering cat, clothes, and car all being gone, she had finally went on her eagerly anticipated road trip. Unfortunately, due to the fact that Kara had been granted power of attorney over her sister's bank accounts, she was able to access her bank account data, and in the process, she saw the activity that had taken place following her leaving her apartment on March 9th. So the recreated timeline is as follows. On March 9th, Leah withdrew several $1,000s and later stayed at a hotel near Memphis, Tennessee. Then, for the next few days, she stopped to get food and gas several times while heading west on Interstate 40. And from there, she went north on Interstate 5. And then the last purchase that showed up on her bank's financial records was on the morning of March 13th, when she stopped for gas in Brooks, Oregon. And believe it or not, later on, police ended up actually acquiring video footage from her stop here, and in it, Leah was reportedly completely alone and appeared to be in good health. It is noted that while waiting for the transaction inside the gas station, however, she was frequently peering out of the window and looking outside. But after this transaction, the trail seemed to stop there as far as her financial records were concerned. But then on March 18, 2000, a strange and concerning update came regarding this mystery. That morning, a couple were jogging on the side of Canyon Creek Road, a road on the Mount Baker Highway in Washington State, when they caught sight of a bunch of articles of clothing on the side of the road at the top of a slope. And a few of these clothes were even tied to the tree branches and the trees themselves. Then, as the couple were continuing to investigate the bizarre scene, they observed something even more unsettling. At the bottom of the steep embankment next to the side of the road was a Jeep that appeared to have crashed in the wooded region below. So right away, the couple called up 911, and from that point on, the authorities began their own investigation. Soon, a group of police went down and checked out the vehicle, and while one might think that after finding Leah's vehicle it would help solve the mystery, the exact opposite occurred. It really only deepened the mystery. First of all, there was no sign of Leah herself, nor was there any trace of blood or anything inside of the Jeep. And second, the state of the vehicle itself suggested that based on its likely path through the trees and the damage, it was traveling around 40 miles per hour when it crashed into the area below. And the way the contents inside were arranged suggested that the vehicle rolled over multiple times as well. And overall, considering the lack of blood, the fact that the seatbelt wasn't stretched, and the way the glass shattered, investigators were actually able to come to the shocking conclusion that when the vehicle crash landed, nobody was even in it, which created the strange and perhaps even likely possibility that the accident was staged. Now, as for the list of things found inside the Jeep, well, that included $2,500 in cash and jewelry, cat food and a cat carrier, suggesting that Leah did in fact bring her cat with her, and some blankets and pillows, which were hung inside the car's windows. Outside of the car, they were found a series of other items in the surrounding woods, such as Leah's passport, license, checkbook, guitar, CDs, and clothes. And now, while this was a lot of stuff, there was only so much the authorities could extrapolate from it. So after contacting Leah's older siblings, the two of them flew into Bellingham, Washington from North Carolina, and they began to help with the investigation. And after visiting the site of the Jeep, they went into town, printed out a bunch of flyers with Leah's name and face on them, and began asking all the locals if they had seen a young woman who matched their sister's description. And then within a matter of time, they found something that among her stuff that provided a strong hint as to one of the last places she had been. It was actually a ticket stub to a late afternoon showing of the movie American Beauty. The stub was dated March 13th, and the theater was located in a nearby shopping mall known as Bellis Fair. So based on this clue, it's pretty clear that on March 13th, following her getting gas in Brooks, Oregon, she drove the nearly 5 hours to Bellingham and spent some time in the town. And based on police interviews with two men, Leah also sat down and ate at the restaurant right next to the theater. The men apparently sat on both sides of Leah at the restaurant counter and were introduced to her in the process. And according to these two men who had themselves spoken with Leah, they discussed Jack Kerouac and her cross country road trip. Now, one of these two men even reported that he saw her leave with a man who he heard her call Barry. And he even provided enough of a description for a forensic artist to create a police sketch. But evidently, he was the only person to see this man, because no other customers, including the customer who sat on the opposite side of her, reported seeing this Barry individual. And outside of these two men who claimed to talk to Leah and the mysterious Barry, the only other somewhat credible witness claim to seeing her post-disappearance came from a person who called the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office a few days after the Jeep was found. And according to what this unknown person said, his wife had seen Leah at a gas station in Everett, Washington, where she appeared to be sort of stumbling around, looking confused and disoriented. But oddly enough, the man hung up before revealing his name, and he appeared to be acting a bit nervously. So that was a strange addition to this. But as the investigation went on, it just got increasingly frustrating. In April of 2000, teams of searchers and trained canines were dispatched to search for Leah, and the searchers even used metal detectors, which, considering the metal rod in her leg, could have potentially been useful, but unfortunately, not much of any significance came as a result of these searches. Eventually, the FBI got involved in the case because the vehicle crash took place on federal lands, and one thing the agents ultimately did figure out regarding her Jeep was that a wire under the hood had been cut, which would have allowed for the car to accelerate without anyone manually placing their foot on the gas pedal, which lent even more credence to the theory that the vehicle was intentionally crashed without anyone in it. But in addition to these strange details, there were also much more worrying clues found. For example, they finally found Leah's mother's engagement ring underneath the car's floor mat, which, according to her friends, was really not the type thing that she would ever leave behind. I mean, she wore it and protected it religiously. Also discovered was a fingerprint belonging to a male underneath the hood of the car, and DNA belonging to a male on an article of Leah's clothing. Now, because of the fact that the man who talked to Leah in the restaurant and claimed to see her leave with some other unidentified person was the only witness to see this other dude, he was looked at in terms of possible suspects, and his fingerprints were taken to see if they matched the one found under the hood. But it turned out that his did not. And they also took a DNA sample from him, but whether or not that matched the one found on Leah's clothing has not been released yet. Unfortunately, following the FBI's more thorough search through Leah's Jeep, there have been no further updates on this case. Nevertheless, because of its various strange aspects, it's a proper fit for level 4 of our series. This case belongs in level 4 because, well, Leah has a clear last verified stretch of movement, and then the trail breaks in ways that don't behave like a normal disappearance. The Jeep scene appears potentially staged, key belongings are scattered in odd combinations, and even major search efforts and federal involvement failed to produce one evidence-backed explanation that cleanly accounts for what happened. Level 5, Impossible to Explain, aka the Reality Breaker. Now, this is where strange details stop being side notes and become the entire case. At level 5, the mystery behaves like a closed room disappearance. Okay, so people are documented entering a controlled space, but there's no verified exit, no consistent physical trail, and later digital activity creates more contradictions than answers. At this level, the case doesn't just feel unsolved, it feels like reality itself stopped making sense. Pretty much everyone knows that the Brian Schaefer case, where he was last seen entering the aptly named Gateway building and was never captured coming out. And you'd be hard-pressed to find someone not familiar with Eliza Lamb and the Cecil Hotel in 2013, a case that was later solved, but fewer people have heard of a similar yet equally as intriguing case out of South Korea. One that took place in the spring of 2016 when a newlywed couple by the names of Choi Sung-hee and Jun Min-goon went missing under remarkably odd circumstances. Now, to give you some background here, Choi was a 33-year-old stage actress, while Jun was a 34-year-old restaurant owner. The pair had gotten married in late 2015, and they lived in an apartment in the city of Busan with their dog, and Choi was even 8 weeks pregnant. Based on every indication, they both had a lot of stuff to live for. But on the night of May 27, 2016, Choi was caught on surveillance footage returning home from the grocery store and entering her apartment building around 11:30 p.m. Then, several hours later, at about 3:45 a.m. on the 28th, her husband John was also caught on surveillance returning home after having been out drinking with some friends of his. But here's where it gets incredibly strange. So, despite the fact that each of them were caught entering the building, neither of them were ever caught leaving the building. And keep in mind that this apartment building was very heavily monitored. In total, there were 22 cameras covering the complex, and these cameras covered every single entrance and exit. And according to investigators who have gone over every single possible theory and all the facts and evidence regarding the case, they have explicitly said that they do not believe that the couple ever left the apartment. But as strange as this sounds, it only gets stranger when we talk about what happened in the subsequent days and weeks following the couple's disappearance. So following their disappearance, the first updates were a suspicious series of text messages and phone calls from their phones that many believe were not actually from them. The first text chronologically came at 1 p.m. on May 28th from what appeared to be Jun, who had vanished earlier that morning. The text was sent to the co-owner of his restaurant, and it read, "Something came up at home. Let's close the restaurant for the day." And then the next text sent out was sent from Choi's phone that same day at 11:56 p.m., and it was sent to her theater troupe's group chat. In it, she apparently told the assistant director of the theater that she would not be at rehearsal the following day since she wasn't feeling well. And then the next day, on May 29th, a bunch of unusual actions were taken by Jun. At 6:28 p.m., he transferred the money in his restaurant's operating account to his business partner, before then texting his partner yet again saying, "I won't be able to work for a while." Then he even called his restaurant staff and had a brief conversation with them. And according to the staff, they said he sounded slightly different than usual and that he sounded extremely tired, exhausted even, perhaps as if he was very stressed or something. Meanwhile, also on the 29th, one of Choi's coworkers called her, and when they called, the person who answered was not her, but instead someone claiming to be Jun. And over the phone, he told the coworker that his wife couldn't come to the phone and would not be returning to work for the time being. And by the way, it's important to mention that this coworker had never heard his voice before. So had someone been impersonating him, they would not be able to tell. But then on May 30th, yet another message was sent from Choi's phone to the assistant director of her theater troupe, this time saying that she wasn't going to be able to perform at all anymore after reportedly being hospitalized because of an accident. And Choi, or the person posing as her, also added that her most recent hospitalization was a result of something similar to the last time she was hospitalized. And it's not entirely clear what was meant by the last time, but we do know that she had a history of depression. Regardless, when the assistant theater director tried to reply to the message, they were unable to do so because Choi's phone got shut off. Additionally, it's been noted that the texts sent were very grammatically formal, which was not the way she normally texted. Nevertheless, more unusual activity would take place after this. Also on the 30th, John allegedly called one of Choi's coworkers from her phone and said that she was currently sedated in the hospital and unable to speak, and he apologized for the trouble. Of course, the only problem police would later discover about this was that none of the hospitals in the area had any records of her being admitted as a patient. But on the 31st, after a few days of John's father continually trying to call his son and continually failing to get in contact with him, he decided to report his son missing. From that point on, a full-fledged investigation soon began by local police. 2 days later, the Busan police entered John and Choi's apartment, only to discover a very unusual scene. So inside the apartment, there was no sign of forced entry or violence, and it almost looked as if time had completely frozen. Groceries were still on the counter. There was a pot of food that was just sitting out. Unwashed dishes were in the sink, and a load of laundry had yet to be washed. Additionally, as far as personal belongings were concerned, Choi's handbag and the couple's car keys were still in the home, and their car even remained in the building's parking lot. Now, there were some items that were missing from the apartment, however, and this included the couple's phones, passports, wallets, IDs, a laptop, and some of their clothes. And really, one of the saddest things was that the couple's dog was left behind. So when the cops found him, the dog was hungry and scared and alone. And it's even been noted that the little pupper was still recovering from some type of surgery at that point. Meanwhile, friends noted that Choi loved her dog and would never have left him alone like this without arranging for someone to take care of him. So all in all, the scene was very suspicious. But as I mentioned, police found absolutely zero evidence of forced entry or violence or blood. And the state of the apartment really appeared as if they had just stepped out temporarily and were planning to return. But once the authorities finished their search of the apartment and moved on to checking the surveillance camera footage, they were shocked to learn that none of the 22 cameras caught them leaving whatsoever. Also, investigators checked a bunch of local surveillance cameras in the nearby area, and well, none of them caught the couple leaving either. So ultimately, some of the authorities came to the shocking conclusion that the couple never left the apartment building. The same day, however, that the authorities searched the apartment, John's father finally received a message from his son's phone. And the message simply read, "I'm fine." But that message would ultimately be the final message ever sent from that phone. Sometime around 9 a.m. on June 2nd, cellular records show that John's phone was last active near a bus stop in Gijiang County in northeastern Busan, while Chui's phone was last active in Seoul's Gangdong district 13 hours later. And oddly enough, these two locations are 400 kilometers or roughly 250 miles apart. And Chui's phone specifically was pinged in an area that was close to where her husband's mother lived in Seoul. However, after that night, neither phone ever transmitted a signal again. And there were never any bank transactions on their cards, they never used their IDs, and they never had any immigration or travel records. So with the limited information available, the authorities had to come up with some theories. They considered whether the couple had voluntarily disappeared, but had that been the case, why were their credit cards and IDs never used again? Also, why did nobody ever report seeing them in person anywhere? Investigators also considered that, well, maybe they took their own lives, but the problem with this idea was that police never found any bodies nor any notes. So before long, authorities shifted to the idea that the couple's disappearance had to be the result of foul play. And naturally, one of the theories was that perhaps John actually had been alive and was the one, sending the text messages, making phone calls and stuff. After all, he was the only one out of him and his wife who actually made phone calls to people and spoke. And this theory generally also revolves around the central idea that he could have somehow killed his wife himself and then disposed of her body. But if this were the case, why were no screams or anything heard by neighbors on the night of their disappearances? And why was there no evidence of a struggle? Well, proponents of this idea suggest that it's possible that maybe he relocated her to a different apartment in the complex and killed her there before sneaking past a camera blind spot and slipping down the stairwell. But then what happened to him? Where would he have gone? Well, he would have had to either one, escape the country, or two, potentially die sometime afterward or go into hiding. Now, as far as this theory is concerned, investigators have found virtually no evidence to support it, but nothing can or should be ruled out, in my opinion. Anyway, eventually, the authorities responsible for this case identified a person of interest following a series of interrogations and interviews with the missing couple's family and friends. And during these discussions, one name kept popping up over and over again, that of John's ex-girlfriend, which leads us into yet another final theory. Police reportedly examined whether the newlywed's ex-girlfriend could have had some involvement. So this ex-girlfriend is a woman commonly referred to as Yoon. And according to reports, the two of them dated when they were younger, but they did not end up marrying. And eventually, they went their separate ways. Then in 2004, Yoon got married to someone else. However, this marriage later ended in divorce, and then over the next decade after that, her life was quite turbulent. She got married yet again and moved to Norway with her new husband, and well, she started a new life there. Meanwhile, throughout this entire time, however, Yoon allegedly continued to remain in contact with John. It doesn't appear as if this correspondence was entirely one-sided. In fact, according to some of his friends, he himself owned a second cell phone specifically to speak with her. By the way, this doesn't necessarily mean he still liked her in a romantic fashion. It just means that he felt it necessary to continue to communicate with her for whatever reason. By the way, that's an important distinction. Meanwhile, his wife Choi originally had no knowledge of either the phone, nor his correspondence with this other woman. And then later in 2015, reports claim Yoon experienced a miscarriage, and that after that, her behavior toward him allegedly escalated. For long, she was allegedly sending him a high volume of strange messages and calls. And by late 2015, as his relationship with his soon-to-be wife was becoming increasingly serious, and the pair even got engaged, Yoon reportedly became even more hostile. And during this period, she allegedly contacted Jun and sometimes even Choi as well, and sent them a bunch of threats. And because of these threats, the married couple were growing more and more frightened. Soon, Choi sought professional help and took steps to protect her privacy, including changing her contact information. And yet, despite her doing so repeatedly, Yoon allegedly kept finding out the new phone numbers and continuing the unwanted contact. And ultimately, the couple even ended up hiring additional security for their wedding. So, considering all I've just explained about her reported behavior, investigators treated Yoon as a key person of interest for a time. And on top of what we've discussed, they also learned more pertinent information regarding her whereabouts during the time of the couple's bizarre disappearance. Reports say she traveled to South Korea only weeks before the couple went missing. And according to authorities, she returned to Norway in early June 2016, around the time the case became public. Meanwhile, investigators say that when she was in Korea, she was using cash to pay for everything and staying in short-term places like saunas, spas, or motels. In addition, she allegedly told at least one family member she was traveling somewhere else at the time. Apparently, Africa was where she claimed to be. So all in all, police saw this as suspicious. In March of 2017, they requested an Interpol Red Notice, meaning an international request to locate and provisionally arrest someone pending extradition. Then, months later in 2017, Yoon was detained in Norway in connection with that request. But her being back in Norway was ultimately going to be a problem for police, despite the fact that the Norwegians originally claimed that they were going to be cooperative. The case against her hit a snag here because, in order to extradite her to Korea, the law required that she be officially accused of a crime. So before long, Korean authorities accused her of attempted coercion and illegal confinement plus threats. But the problem here would end up being the fact that the evidence described was largely circumstantial. And so ultimately, the extradition effort did not succeed. Soon, Yoon hired lawyers to fight the extradition. And a year later, in December of 2018, Norwegian courts denied the South Korean extradition request. To this day, the case is still in limbo. Courts have said the Interpol notice and related requests have been renewed over time, and if Yoon were ever to travel to another country or back to South Korea, she could possibly be arrested. But that has yet to happen. And some even argue that this fixation on her for so long potentially could have hurt investigators' chances of uncovering valuable information not related to her. So that leads us to today. Today, there's really no hard, concrete evidence that Yoon was responsible for the couple's disappearance. And even if one were to theorize that she was, that would only complete part of the puzzle. It seems unlikely that she could have gone to the couple's apartment and disappeared or even killed them herself. So what happened here? Could this have been a highly sophisticated contract killing or something? And if so, where are their bodies? Reality is, as of now, the case is still a mystery yet to be solved, but does fit all of our criteria for level 5. This is level 5 because the couple is clearly documented entering one location and then they effectively vanish from the physical record. The apartment appears frozen midlife, device activity continues in suspicious ways, and even after full investigation and international leads, no coherent evidence-backed reconstruction explains what physically happened to them. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that I really do hope all the cases we talked about today someday reach some type of resolution. Now, fundamentally, when a person goes missing or even dies, it doesn't just affect the person it's happening to, it affects their entire family and all the people who care about them. All of us like to think of ourselves as individuals, but in truth, we belong to a much larger network of people and society as a whole. And every single life has significance, in my opinion, partly because every life has the power to impact every other life, like how a single pebble thrown in the ocean creates a series of ripples. So just remember that when you think of yourself as just another person.